Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell, and it's a delight to be with you today. Along with me is my cohort, Don Preston, Dr. Don Preston, and we're just excited to be with you today, and looking forward to another great study. Hope that you've been having a fantastic week and that you have been enjoying all the pleasant things that God has created in this universe. For the next few minutes, we'll be talking to you on subjects related to the foundation for a new temple, as we have been doing for several weeks. But right now, let's go ahead and call in Dr. Preston, and let's hear from him. I know he's been out of the state taking care of some personal business, etc., but let's see what he's got to tell us today about what's happening out in the world of the Oklahomans.
Well, we're burning up. That's what's happening. That's what's happening in Ardmore, Oklahoma. We've been having heat index of 108, 109, and what have you. It has been, and you know, I'm really a hot weather kind of person. 100 degrees is really okay with me. And that's legitimate. I can work outside. I can work in my shop if it's 100. When it gets heat index, I mean, of that 105, 109, which we've had for several days, I mean, it's like walking into a wall when you go outside. And so it's kind of funny. We've got 2 dogs, and they have both turned into inside dogs during this hot weather. We have a sunroom, and we let them into our sunroom, which is air conditioned. And boy, they trying to get them to go back outside is next to impossible. They just flat do not want to go out there. And I can't say that I blame them just an awful lot, but it is kind of funny to witness how they act. It's like just open the back door. We'll come right in. We'll lay down. We won't bother anybody. We won't bother anything. We'll just lay down and go to sleep. Just leave us alone.
Well, I can imagine with that weather.
Yeah, it's just it's pretty miserable. When I went out to feed them a while ago, I let them out of the sunroom, and they walked outside. They walked around a couple of times. They wanted right back in the house. They just decided, no. We're perfectly fine inside. Just bring our food inside, and we'll eat it in here. We've been getting a big bang out of them because of the way that they act. You know, I guess I'm a little old school in a way. You just think, well, animals belong outside, but boy, these 2 dogs, they think they belong inside. So, like I said, we kind of get a bang out of them, get a laugh out of them. So
well,
what's
good.
going on in your world over there in Memphis, William?
Well, it's warm here too. I try to stay out of it as much as I possibly can, but occasionally you do, have to get out, and so things have been busy a little bit. I'm engaged in a little informal discussion, debate, which is almost like a seminar instead of a debate, but that's going. It's been keeping me busy, and doing some editing, et cetera, to get some videos out. Now I can concentrate on a little bit of work now that I got that behind me. We are still looking forward to some studies that are being set up with individuals. There's a little noise going on in the background there.
Yeah, my phone. This is the time of evening, unfortunately, that we get most of our spam calls, and sometimes we just completely disconnect the phone about this time of the evening. But we didn't do it this evening, and that's the second or third phone call.
There's the fourth one.
Yeah.
Well, I know what you mean because we get them a lot during the day here. I'll be turning 65, Lord willing, in September. And so you talk about all of the insurance companies and the Medicare, whatever, Medicaid, all. I mean, that's quite a nice way to introduce someone to being 65 years old. You get all these calls from the insurance company and from all these people trying to sell you, policies and get you on Medicare and Medicaid and blah, 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 blah. So I have a rule here, my answer machine is digital, and so it will basically tell me who's calling, and most of those phone calls say unavailable. So if I think they're talking to me, so I just become unavailable and don't answer them. Yeah.
Well, it sure is a hassle, and we put our name and number on the do not call list, but it seemed that increased the number of calls that we got. So I'm not sure that did just an awful lot of good. So it's really, really aggravating, but I don't know what to do about it except disconnect the phone from time to time. And then as certain as you do, you'll miss an important phone call from somebody who has some really good Bible questions. They're really looking for the truth, and they want to talk to somebody. They may be feeling alone. And to switch gears here, I want to encourage all of our listeners to please have Tom Mills and his family in your prayers. William, I assume that you're aware of the fact that Tom Mills, who did our live stream video work, all of our technical work at the Preston Children Weekend this year, just a great guy. His wife passed away yesterday.
Yes.
She went into the doctor for what they thought was kind of routine testing. She had evidently some bowel issues, and they discovered that she had a massive case of an extremely rare and extremely aggressive kind of cancer. And they initially said she has a few days to live. They were going to take her back home to pass away, and she didn't even make the trip. She passed away. And I mean, they have 9 children, and so this leaves Tom as the sole care provider for all 9 children. And a GoFundMe account has been set up. You can go to my Facebook page, Don K. Preston, on Facebook, and there's a tab there how you can contribute to Tom. I did notice that a lot of people are responding to that and contributing, but of course there's going to be tremendous amount of medical bills and the funeral expense. The funeral is Thursday, and I just wish I could go. Tom is just an outstanding guy, a man of deep, deep faith, and it's just so horrifically sad to see what has happened in this. The loss is just overwhelming. And so I want to encourage everyone who listens to this program to please have him and his 9 children in your prayers. And if you can contribute to help him out with the tremendous expense that is being incurred during this period of time, that will obviously be appreciated by him and his family. I know that it would. So I just wanted to make that announcement.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Don. I was aware of it and did contribute on last night. Um, just looking at the family, of course, we've seen them at the Predators Program weekend, but when you see that picture of them and those armed babies, and their mother is gone, that's really, really kind of sad thing to watch, just to look at that picture. And as I understand it, I think, was she not pregnant with another child?
Yes, and
I'm not sure. Yeah.
She lost that child, and
yes.
so that's just another of the loss that is compounding the sorrow at this time. So it's difficult to imagine that burden of that loss, how horrific it is at this time. One sadness on top of another.
Right. Well, Tom, if you're listening, we certainly have you in our prayers. Our hearts go out to you and your family, and I trust and pray that you will be able to pull through this time. I know it's going to take quite a bit of time, and I'm thankful to all of the people who are responding to help with some of the finances that are being incurred with this situation. I know it just had to really take you by storm, but you're in our prayers. So God bless you through this, and to all of your family, and to those boys as well as those young girls. God be with you.
Amen. Amen to that. Well, it's times like this that our faith is such a marvelous and wonderful thing that we rejoice in the promises of God. We rejoice in the assurances that He has given us in His Word. We rejoice in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is the most foundational aspect of life itself, of giving us the assurance that all of the rest of His promises are solid and stand sure and what have you. It's interesting to me, William, that on my Facebook page, as I made the announcement, and people were posting and offering up prayers and condolences and what have you, and one of the representatives from the Israel-only camp posted something to the effect, well, that's really tragic, but the point of fact is there is no eternal life promise for her or for anyone else. And I thought, well, nothing could more clearly exemplify the godlessness, the despair of that Israel-only mentality that says we have nothing to look forward to. We have no promises, and so that short, simple statement by that Israel-only representative, I have to tell you, it just flew all over me. I immediately deleted the comment. I was absolutely not going to allow that kind of garbage and that kind of godlessness to be posted there on a post that was intended to allow people to offer up their prayers and their condolences and what have you. And for someone to think that it would be okay to come on there and to offer up that kind of cynical, atheistic kind of garbage, like I said, it literally flew all over me. I really got angry about that.
Yeah, and rightly so. It's very unthoughtful and insensitive comment to make at the time, to impose your views at a time like that when people really need encouragement and comfort. And, it's just not the time. There's as the Bible says, there's a time and place for everything. And that was just inappropriate from my point of view. I didn't see the comment. I don't even want to read it. I'm sure you have deleted it all, so far.
Oh, yeah.
It's just
the moment I read it, I deleted. Yeah, I did not fail to delete it for 2 seconds after I read it. Like I said, the anger just swept over me. The uncaring attitude, the callousness, the arrogance. I don't know how long the comment had been there on my site. I don't always check on my Facebook page or my YouTube, for that matter, during the day because I'm so busy. But the moment, like I said, literally the moment that I read it, I hit the delete button. I just simply could not believe somebody could be that uncaring and that arrogant and that caustic at such a time as this. It's absolutely reprehensible, and it's absolutely inexcusable type of behavior. So anyway, that is what it is. There are lots and lots and lots of people out there who care, who believe, who are praying, and who support Tom and his family at this awful, awful, sad time. And for someone to try to destroy that camaraderie, that shared concern, that shared faith, well, like I said, it's inexcusable. It just shows a heart that is not, as barely human as far as I'm concerned. Human nature essentially says you share in other people's griefs to a certain extent. But to say, well, it's sad, but no, I'm sorry. I came real close to blocking that individual. I have not yet, but I may well do so. I've got no place for that kind of mentality.
Well, rightly so, and I certainly agree with those comments and your sentiments.
Well, William, last week we talked about Isaiah chapter 61 and the Messianic temple. I think it's really interesting, by the way, that over the last 2 days, I've received at least 2, maybe 3 emails from individuals asking about the Messianic temple. And I have pointed them to our program here, to the archives. And then their more specific questions have been having to do with Ezekiel 40 through 47. Now, we're going to get there, folks. If you are listening to us on this program, if you've been following us along, then you know that we have not yet gotten to Ezekiel. And I guess we're saving the best to last. At least we can hope that it will be the best. I can't wait to hear what William Bell has to say about Ezekiel 40 to 47. Because I'm really hoping to sit back and relax and listen about that time. But those are some of the most daunting questions, or I should say chapters, in the Bible when it comes to the Messianic temple. But there are answers. And if you want my preliminary opinion and preliminary heads up on that, I would recommend that you go to Malachi chapter 3 and read Malachi chapter 3 verses 1 to 4, and then look at who he's talking about there, about the messenger who would come to prepare the way of the Lord, and then the messenger who would come suddenly to his temple. And that is all directly related to Ezekiel chapters 40 through 47. And I think you'll begin to get some insight into that and to the application. And by the way, William, did you ever purchase your own copy of the book that I recommended to you here a little while back? It is entitled Temple of Presence by Andrea Robinson. Did you ever get that?
I think I did. As a matter of fact, I was sitting here looking for it because I had it on my desk. If it's the same, is that the little hardback book with the blue cover? Is that the one?
Yes.
Okay. Then, yeah, I have it. And I was just kind of looking through it because I thought I might have read something in it that, I could have commented on, but I can't find it at the moment. But it's got to be near me now because I'm surrounded by books.
Yeah. Well, do I ever understand that? I'm currently working on about 2 or 3 articles at the same time. And as you undoubtedly are doing there, you grab books off the shelf and you read from them and you lay them aside. You grab another one, you read from it, you lay it aside. And so I made a comment on one of my Now TV videos that I was filming in my actual office, that this is not by any means a studio set up somewhere. This is my real world environment. And I said, if you can see my desk, but really honestly, you don't want to look at my desk. It is a sight to behold. And that's even after I put up about 10 books back on the shelf just the other day. But it's still stacked way, way high. But that's just the way it goes when you're doing research and you're looking for the material, and you're looking here, you're looking there, and you'll find a little nugget, and you say, okay, I want to keep that book right here so I can come back to it. And then you do the same thing with about 15 or 20 books. And the next thing you know, you can't even hardly see over the books on your desk. It's kind of funny. But that's certainly the way I do it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, something else I'm beginning to see, and maybe how a lot of times you don't recognize a particular car, until either you bought one or had some type of emotional experience with one, and then you look around and you see it everywhere, the same model, color, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of the way it's been as I look through some of these writings I've been reading through, especially those that focus on, either the apocalyptic literature or the temple, et cetera, et cetera. And I just find them making such, great and extensive use of these, apocalyptic writings that have a lot of temple typology, in them. Of course, we've talked about Margaret Barker's work in the past, but, some of these other writers are engaging in this quite a bit as well, which I think is very encouraging, because that certainly helps us to become more familiar with them and to see how they apply within the fulfilled perspective of, of eschatology, and to get a real good glimpse of these writers and what they were seeing, and then how it gets interpreted from the perspective of Christ and the apostles.
Well, and that very thing that you point out in the book that we just mentioned, the Temple of Presence by Andrea Robinson, she makes extensive use of the apocalyptic writings and what's known as the Pseudepigrapha, and the books from the intertestamental period of time, which is what these are. And so she does a magnificent job of showing the varied views of these early writers, the intertestamental period of time, and even the very earliest of the contemporary Christian period of time, of how those writers of those pseudepigraphic of that pseudepigraphic literature, of how they viewed the Messianic temple described in Ezekiel 40 to 47. And it's more than remarkable. There seemed to be 2 or 3 different views of that. Number one, there was the view that Ezekiel was talking about a literal temple. Number 2, there was the view that it was a mixture between a literal temple and a heavenly temple. Or number 3, a spiritual temple. And so it's fascinating. In other words, what I mean by that, a spiritual temple is that there was actually a view that the community of believers itself would be the temple. That was not an unknown view. And so she does a great job documenting this from all of this extra biblical literature, from including the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then this is Apocrypha. When you have someone who is documenting this from all of these earlier writings, then you can see how the New Testament writers were not standing on an island. They were simply making the proper application. They were drawing on a very rich literary tradition, and they were pointing people to Jesus, the ultimate fulfillment of those prophecies. And this other literature had been laying a foundation, creating an expectation, if you please, of a spiritual temple. It's not like this idea, in other words, it's not like this idea just sprang up out of nowhere. The foundation was being laid. And so here come the apostles, here comes Jesus, saying that his followers, that he is the foundation stone, the chief cornerstone, the living cornerstone of the Messianic temple. That was not a brand spanking new idea. Was it revolutionary for Jesus to say that he was the one? Yes, it was. No doubt about that. But the idea of a living temple was not unknown. So I find it absolutely remarkable to read books like this. And it's exciting to read books like this because when we approach our dispensational friends, for instance, and we talk about a spiritual temple, one not built of rock and wood and mortar or whatever, then guess what, folks? We're not saying anything that was not well known and even not well accepted in the ancient times. And again, that's what's exciting to me. And of course, the dispensationalists might turn right around and say, well, hey, yeah, but there was also the expectation of a physical temple. That's true, no doubt about that. But what we are able to do is to say, okay, there was an expectation of a physical temple among some of the ancients. However, there was also the expectation of the spiritual temple, and chief and foremost, and most important of all, the New Testament writers make that spiritual application and interpretation of those Old Testament prophecies, as, for instance, we've been sharing on this program, of how the New Testament writers tell us that Jesus Christ was himself the rejected cornerstone. Jesus himself said so in Matthew 21, 42 and 44, 43 through 44. Peter said in Acts 4, 11 and following. Peter said it again in 1 Peter chapter 2, that Christ was the chief cornerstone. He was the foundation stone of the Messianic temple. So when we have this kind of inspired application of those Old Testament prophecies of the Messianic temple, then we can confidently say, okay, here are the expectations, the varied expectations of the Messianic temple to be found in the intertestamental period of literature in the Pseudepigrapha, in the Dead Sea community. However, here's the New Testament. Here are the inspired writers making the inspired application. And that should be the end of all controversy. And thus, when we
Very
come... Good. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, excellent comments. I appreciate that.
Well, again, it's just fascinating to read that material. And I just have to make this comment. You know, on Facebook, there have been a couple of different individuals. When I would bring up and quote the scholars, these individuals would literally scoff and ridicule me for bringing up scholarship and this literature that is so rich, that is so powerful. I don't need no scholarship. All I need is the Bible. And of course, as I reminded one individual, if it wasn't for that scholarship that you are scoffing at, you wouldn't even have a Bible in your hand. You know, it took Greek scholars, to translate the Greek text into English. And they didn't have much to say about that, of course. But it's really, really, it's exasperating to me in many ways. It's frustrating in many ways when you read individuals that they literally scoff at scholarship. Folks, listen, we don't have to accept every single thing that scholars have to say. We don't have to accept their interpretation, for instance, of the apocalyptic eschatological predictions of Jesus I was pointing out in one of my videos just recently, I pointed to the New International Greek Testament commentary set that's on the shelf immediately behind me in my videos, to the Word Biblical Commentary set that's immediately behind me, and to some of the other, world-class scholarly literature commentaries. And I said, look, I read this stuff virtually every day of my life, but I don't agree with every single thing. Now, do I look at their linguistic commentary, their linguistic analysis? Do I look at their grammatical arguments? I absolutely do. And in about 99.9% of all of the cases, you can use the very linguistic arguments they make, the grammatical arguments they make, the historical arguments they make to prove the preterist case. Now, here's the issue. What happens with these scholars? They know the Greek inside out, upside down, in and out. And they tell us that the meaning of the words, the linguistic of the words that are used by Jesus and the New Testament writers is unequivocal. They expected the coming of the Lord. They taught that the coming of the Lord was going to happen in the first century. It was near. It was at hand. But these same scholars, because they have such a literalistic view of the language of apocalyptic, because they have not themselves tapped into the reality that the language of coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, with the angels and flaming fire and the gathering, because they have not tapped into the metaphoric, figurative, hyperbolic nature of that language. They say, well, everybody knows that didn't happen. Why? Well, because they demand a physical fulfillment. So on the one hand, linguistically, they are without peers. They are some of the finest Greek scholars in the world. They know the definition of the words. But they lose, tragically, they lose sight of the metaphoric meaning, not definition, the metaphoric meaning and application of the language of the coming on the clouds and what have you. So, again, scholarship is absolutely fantastic and wonderful. It's to be used by us. I marvel at the depth of the scholarship that is in these books, but I also marvel at how naive, sometimes, very often, their interpretations of the language and the literature of the ancient Hebrews truly is. It's remarkable and it's troubling. But this, by the way, is one of the reasons why men such as N.T. Wright has been accused of being a full preterist by his enemies. Because N.T. Wright, and I would also point out R.T. France, Scott McKnight, and a host of other scholars, they see that this language of the coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory is not literalistic language. Laying on my desk among that plethora of books is N.T. Wright's book, Jesus and the Victory of God. And he just ties into the dispensational world with their literalistic view of that kind of language, saying there's no excuse for taking that language literally. It was used to describe God's actions within history when he would use one nation to destroy another nation. And you're going, okay, since you got that so correct, then how in the world, why in the world, do you ever come up with a literal, visible, bodily coming of Jesus sometime in the future? Because Jesus' coming clouds of heaven with power and great glory, which you've already just admitted is not literalistic. So this is the wonderment as we read scholarship, that we truly do have to be aware that scholars are just as prone to false interpretation as anyone else. What is important is to glean from their expertise in the language, in the history, in the culture. That is the type of scholarship that I revel in, and I know you do as well, William. It's bringing these resources, bringing this information out in such a way that dummies like us can take that information. We can take their linguistic ability and we can say, see, here are the world-class scholars. Here are scholars whose scholastic and academic prowess in the language is unparalleled, it's unequal, and it's not challengeable. We agree with what they're saying on the linguistics. We agree with their grammar. We agree with the history. And it builds our case. And
yeah, it was interesting.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, you're talking about these scholars, et cetera. It was interesting. I was reading a translation of the Bible today that I had been recently introduced to, and had some very, very positive renderings of verb tenses in the Bible. I don't know if you've been aware of that, the Concordant New Testament.
My copy was delivered to the store today.
Okay. All right. Well, I got mine on yesterday, and I happened to be gleaning through it, and I ran across, a passage that, based on studies that I had done, was not quite rendered accurately. And so I picked up the phone and I called the guy, and he said they're in the middle of actually doing some revisions at this time. And so I had a good conversation with one of the gentlemen there about the particular text. And while he didn't necessarily agree with the slant that I was giving him on it, but he did recognize the linguistic argument that I was making regarding the text. And he said he would refer it to them so that they could look into it. But if they could get that piece right, man, that would be very, very good. But that's the value of, reading these scholars, learning from them. And as a matter of fact, one point was brought up, a technical point about a particular tense. And he had made a statement concerning it. I said, well, I've been sort of studying under a Greek scholar, and he made a comment that was contrary to what you said. So he actually sent me a PDF, which I'm going to read, and then I'm going to contact the Greek scholar that I've been studying under and ask him to comment on the information there so I can, just see how their comments differ. But I had made a note while I was studying through the course of that particular point because it stuck out with me. And I know I'm talking, all around the point because I don't want to talk specifically about what the issue is, so that I don't give my detractors an opportunity to try to go in and at any rate. But that's the value of that. And so when you can have some input, or you can understand these things enough, and it's not that we're trying to get any leverage for what we do. It's just that we want things accurate so that we can know that we're dealing with the right, interpretation and have the right source and information there, and then let the chips fall where they may. That's the way I see it. I'm not trying to stack them in my favor or anything. I just want to make sure you got this one right and that, all of this stuff is right. And then we can decide what we should be believing and teaching on the matter.
Well, that's exactly right. You make a point there that, many people accuse us of preterists as trying to stack the deck and trying to slant the evidence and what have you. But that simply is not true. Just recently, and you've had this happen countless times, William, people say, well, you preterists, you're constantly redefining biblical terms. Well, it's been my experience that what we as preterists have been doing is we go back And we are redefining terms. That's accurate, but we are redefining them in the very way that the Bible actually defines them. We are redefining the, shall we say, I'll use the term, modern definition of the term, but the modern definition of the term is not accurate. It's just like Adam Clarke, and this goes back to the 18th century, of course, but Adam Clarke in his commentary on Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3, and the disciples asking about the end of the world. Adam Clarke rightly pointed out they were not asking about the end of the world. They were asking about the end of the age. And Adam Clarke has an excellent discussion of the accurate translation, the accurate definition of the Greek words and Greek term, suntelia, to aeonion, aeonio, that is used there in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3. And all of us who are preterists, when we discovered the genuine, when we discovered the accurate, when we discovered the true definition of age, not as world, but as age, in Matthew chapter 24, verse 3, all of a sudden we had to rework our own paradigms. And to realize the disciples were not by any stretch in the imagination asking about the end of the physical world. And they most assuredly were not asking about the end of the Christian age. And so this charge that preterists are constantly redefining terms is just absolutely ludicrous. And what's interesting to me is that we so often find that the enemies of preterism, and when the people who are futurists are confronted with the reality of what the Greek actually said, all of a sudden they're the ones looking for alternate definitions. William, you and I were sitting side by side up in Michigan a couple of weeks ago when Holger Neubauer made the point that in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul uses the present passive indicative or the present active indicative no less than 10 times in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which would indicate that the resurrection of the dead ones had already begun. Well, Bill Lockwood, Holger's opponent in the debate, got up and said, well, Holger, he talks about the present tense and present active indicative. He said that's nothing but a gnomic present. That's nothing but a gnomic. Now, he did not offer a word of proof. Nothing. He just said it's gnomic. It's gnomic. He must have said that's nothing but a gnomic present tense no less than 5 times, if memory serves me correctly. Well, what is a gnomic present? Easiest definition of that is it's a timeless present. It is a statement of something that is present or that is true at all times, or that is occurring at all times. Now, by the way, that's taken directly from Daniel Wallace's book, Beyond the Basics of Greek Grammar. And so here is Daniel Wallace, and by the way, Daniel Wallace cites other leading Greek grammarians. When Daniel Wallace gives the definition of gnomic as something that would not at all fit Bill Lockwood's attempt to avoid the force of it, then you're going, why are they doing things like this? And to go back to our topic of the temple, we could say, why is it that our dispensational friends, when they come to the New Testament statements about the church is the temple of the living God, you are the temple of the living God, as it is written, and it is directly quotes Ezekiel chapter 37, a passage that we will eventually get to. Why is it that our dispensational friends say, oh, well, it cannot mean that, or you're allegorizing? Well, it's not us. what the New Testament is teaching. You are the temple of the living God. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 16. So here's the challenge to all of our futurist friends who insist on a literal physical temple. Ezekiel 37, verse 26, foretold the tabernacle of God being set in the midst of his people for all nations to come to it and to worship the God of Israel, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Here is Paul, who preached nothing but the hope of Israel, found in Moses, the law of the prophets, and he quotes from Ezekiel 37, 26, writing to the church of the living God in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, and he says to them, you are the temple of the living God, as it is written. Now that's a formulaic expression that means you are the fulfillment of that prophecy, the prophecy of the Messianic temple. Well, obviously I'm getting ahead of myself, but the point of it is, when we talk about defining terms, we have to let the Bible define terms. And it is absolutely, undeniably true that what I will use the term, the modern view of eschatology, and yes, I understand it's been around for centuries, but the modern view of eschatology is, in fact, the paradigm that is guilty of redefining terms in such a way or in ways that are radically different from how the Bible does it. And what preterism has done and continues to do is to bring Christianity back to the proper definition of the words. And I mean, I could go on and on. There are some abuses of the Greek text that are being made by former preterists right now that are literally just astounding. I mean, it staggers the imagination to see the lengths and the desperation of former preterists as they manipulate the text. They ignore the various usages, for instance, of the present tense. I mean, what are there? Something like 11 or 12 different usages of the present tense? And yet, they will settle on one in order to establish their case, and they will completely and totally ignore the use of the present tense in passages that negate their futurism. Oh, well, no, that doesn't mean anything. That's irrelevant. That's a different use of the present tense, when in reality it is their use of the present tense that is at fault. It is not ours. And it is not our definition of the temple of God that is at fault. It is the futuristic and literalistic view of the temple of God, definition of the term the temple of God, that is at fault. It is not the spiritual view of the temple of God. William, I'm getting a little bit of a buzz. It's not really a buzz. It's almost like flowing air.
Well, that could be the case because I do have a fan running. Let me go over and flip that off, and that should cut that out. But I'll just kind of pull my microphone down for a second until I get that done.
That actually did it right there. That actually did it. That eliminated the sound right there. So, okay, folks, to go back to Isaiah chapter 61, we've already pointed out to you how here is the prophecy of the coming of the Lord to proclaim the acceptable day of the Lord. And at that time, verse 4, Isaiah 61, they shall build the old waste, they shall raise up the former desolations, they shall repair the waste cities, the desolations of many generations. Now, first of all, we need to point out, there was a literalistic fulfillment of this. Israel returned from captivity. Israel rebuilt the city. They rebuilt the temple. That's what Haggai. That's what Ezra, that's what Nehemiah and Zechariah record for us of the restoration of Israel to the literal land. However, obviously, Isaiah 61 is looking beyond that. And Jesus' application, we keep sharing with you folks, we have to allow the New Testament to be the final arbiter, the final interpreter of these Old Testament prophecies. So when Jesus quotes Isaiah 61 in Luke chapter 4, 16 and following, he reads it verbatim from the Hebrew text. And he closes the scroll, rolls it back up, and he says, this day has this prophecy been fulfilled in your sight. Now, as we pointed out last week, there's no question whatsoever that here is Jesus at the very onset of his ministry. It's barely even begun. And yet here is a prophecy of Isaiah 61 of the restoration of Israel. Israel wasn't fully restored that day. This is a prime example of what is known as prolepsis. Now, prolepsis is a fancy word. We don't hear it used. We don't hear the word prolepsis used all that often in our society. But nonetheless, it is important that we understand what prolepsis is. And I don't know of a greater way to illustrate that than to quote Romans chapter 4 and verse 17. Here Paul is writing about the Abrahamic promise. The promise that to him and his seed, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. And the writer says, Paul the apostle says, I have made thee a father of many nations. That's Yahweh speaking to Abraham. And that was in the parentheses there. Before whom he believed, even God, who quickens the dead and calls those things which are not as though they were. Now, I want everybody to catch that. He calls those things which are not as though they were. So, Yahweh very often spoke of things as current realities, even though they had not yet come to pass. That, folks, is what is known as prolepsis. And so when Jesus said, this day has this prophecy been fulfilled in your eyes, well, it wasn't completely fulfilled that day. It had to be fulfilled over a period of time. But the time was fulfilled. The kingdom of heaven had drawn near. Matthew chapter 3 and verse 2, Mark 1 and verse 15. And so this is a great, great example of prolepsis when Jesus stands up and says, hey, it's fulfilled. And this also explains, by the way, why we see the use of present active indicatives in the New Testament. Because the time of fulfillment had begun. They were living in the present active indicative of the fulfillment. Like Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 16, the law and the prophets were until John, were until John. Since then, the kingdom has been preached, and all men are pressing into it. Well, what does that mean? John came preaching the kingdom. But what did John preach? He didn't say the kingdom was already there. He didn't say the kingdom has come. He said it has drawn near. And that's very, very significant. Now, folks, listen to me. If the kingdom had drawn near, the resurrection had drawn near, because kingdom and resurrection go together. They cannot be separated. As we pointed out last week, these motifs, these tenets, these elements that are eschatological, that are soteriological, they are all interwoven with one another. They are inextricably bound up with one another. You cannot divorce them. So when John preached, the kingdom of heaven is drawn near, guess what? That's saying the new covenant has drawn near. That's saying the Messianic temple has drawn near. That's saying the resurrection has drawn near. Because, once again, all of these constituent elements are so bound up with one another that you cannot divide them. And thus, we find 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 12 that Paul said that God raises the dead. Well, that's in the present active indicative. God is raising the dead. That agrees perfectly with the 10 present active indicatives, or present, most of them are actually present passive indicatives in 1 Corinthians 15. God was in the process of raising the dead. And I'll never forget, William, a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation via email with an individual who claimed to be a full preterist. And I was pointing out the use of the present passive indicatives in 1 Corinthians 15. And they said, well, we can't appeal to that. We cannot use those present passive indicatives or present active indicatives because that would indicate that the resurrection was already ongoing and they were waiting on the consummation of the resurrection. I said, what's the problem? I said, I fail to see an issue here. Let's go to John chapter 5, 24 and following, where Jesus said, the hour is coming, and now is, in which the dead shall hear the voice of the Son of Man and shall live. Those who hear the voice of the Son of Man shall live. Well, if they're dead, and if they live, what is that? That's resurrection, any way you want to put it. So I pointed out to this individual, and I asked him, I said, was Jesus saying that the time had come for resurrection, yes or no? And they were like, you know what? I've never actually made that correlation between John 5, 24, 25, and 1 Corinthians 15, and the present active indicatives there. They said that's really, really an incredibly powerful point. I think it's a powerful point. I don't see it, I don't hear it being made a lot, but to me it's an incredibly powerful point. Because Jesus said the hour had come that the dead would hear the voice, hear his voice, and would live. Again, that's nothing but resurrection. William, your closing thoughts.
Well, I think those are very, very appropriate thoughts. As a matter of fact, I just completed a lesson on Sunday morning where I talked about some of that related to the constituent elements of those time statements, referring to not just simply, Christ's announcement that the kingdom was at hand, as he says in Mark 1:14 and 15, and as you pointed out in Matthew chapter 3. But what he was announcing was the time, the appointed time, was fulfilled for that event. And if that appointed time was fulfilled, then that would incorporate all of the constituent elements for that, particular time to be fulfilled. And strangely enough, you had people acknowledge the fact that those things were at hand from that perspective. But then when they go to the resurrection and those things that related to the end time that are within that same appointed time, such as, Romans 13 and the 1 Peter 4 would teach. They seem, and 2 Timothy 4:1 particularly, they would seem to have amnesia or something related to that point. So I think, your comments on that were very appropriate, and it's something that, these guys really need to look at and really need to address in terms of, having some integrity in dealing with these passages and not just simply claim, at hand can refer to the first part of those statements, but does not refer to the consummative aspects of those very same passages.
Amen. Well, folks, it looks like we're out of time. I want to thank you so much for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. William, it's always great to be with you. And with that, folks, I'm going to say good night and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys and a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.